was originally, there you go. Recording in progress. It was originally scheduled 11:30. We may actually not go until 12:30, but we wanted to leave the time in case we needed the extra time. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And I just wanted to see before we light our chalice, can you just call out some of the feelings that you have into the room right now? We're often think about, what are you feeling right now? Fused, curious, hopeful, uncertain, optimistic, love, committed, happy to not wear a mask. Right. A lot of feelings in the room, and probably others that haven't been mentioned. So we wanted to just begin by breathing and singing together. And you know this song. It goes, when I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe out love. Don't forget to breathe. Just a reminder. All right. I'm going to ask our Minister of Congregational Care, Pastoral Care, Reverend Karen Gustafson, to offer our prayer and chalice.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's just take a breath together. Well, we light this chalice today, the ritual we perform at the start of every gatherings, large and small, here at Unity and many places. This act and every time is a reminder, an invitation, and a challenge. And fount of wisdom. We search our hearts this day in the earnest quest for deeper self-knowledge, for greater self-understanding. We would remove the obstacles to love which hinder us from reaching the fullest fellowship and communion with our neighbors. We would cleanse our hearts of the limiting emotions of fear and of all of those things that get in our way from our connection to one another and separate us from our human companions. To love as we need to, and to love as we ought to, we would begin with ourselves in acceptance and forgiveness. May we face our weaknesses and our apprehensions without contempt. May we face our failures and our imperfections without guilt. To free ourselves of the chains with which we are bound, we would rise in the dignity of self-realization and self-confidence to the mountaintop of living, whence we may see our neighbors and kin, creatures like ourselves, in need of one another. Amen.
Oh, right. I forgot that. Yeah, thanks. So I just want to set the our intention for our time together. And I'm starting with what this gathering is not, and then we'll go into what this gathering is. This gathering is not a time to review all of the materials that some of you may have read and hopefully received this week. There is not enough time, and this is an overview of a plan going forward. So we're not going to review all of those documents. This is also not a forum for sharing opinions. Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, no, always interrupt and let me know. Thank you. So this isn't a time for sharing opinions about the search process. And it's also not a time to develop a concrete plan. This is a time, let me go to what it is, however. Um, it is a time to reflect on some of the things we've heard and and frankly, some of the things that I've heard. I've been with you for 90 days now. And when I came, I had in mind a 30-day plan, a 60-day plan, and a 90-day plan. The 90-day plan is this, is to be able to present to you some of the things that I've heard and learned as your interim minister, and to talk about what is the plan going forward. The second part of our time together today will be from a presentation from the board about some of the things that they have learned and next steps from your Board of Trustees regarding the 2021-2022 search and some of the insights that has been gleaned since then. And we're also going to invite your written and online feedback on these presentations. We wanted you to write rather than just have an open forum, because we want to have we want to document, first of all, what was said. We want to be fair to the people online who cannot participate in real time in this presentation. So there is a survey which we'll tell you about, very brief, and there are also cards around the room. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So what I want, it's not quite so much a lag time. I've heard a lot of grief and confusion about the 2021-22 search process. And the big question that has arisen from a lot of places and a lot of people is, just simply what happened. There's concern about the unacknowledged value of the search committee's work and the residual pain experienced by committee members. Um, There is shock and disappointment arising from statements made and behaviors exhibited in or at and after the May 22nd congregational meeting. And those behaviors specifically included things like emails that were sent out either advocating for or against the candidate. And also, I've heard from more than one source, people were really dismayed by clapping that happened at the congregational meeting and felt that was very disrespectful and hurtful. There is a concern expressed that white supremacy culture at Unity is an underlying or was an underlying cause for the outcome of the vote. Concerns and fears about the next search is certainly in the air here at Unity Church. There's plenty of desire expressed for a plan forward, and that's also expressed for more information about the search process, which harkens back to the first one, concern and confusion about the search process. I've also heard the need for clear and consistent communications from the board and the ministerial search team. And then lastly, but not finally, a lot of unresolved grief around the departure of your former ministers, about the death and illness of your former ministers, ongoing COVID concerns and fears, loss of momentum, loss of friendships, hurt and disappointment, some concern about the loss of Unity's reputation in the wider community, and general disappointment with the church. This is what I've been hearing in my 90 days with you. So I want to say something next about what is the interim time. What is my purpose here with you? Okay. The interim time, as you've probably heard and will get really tired of me saying, exploring a congregation's history and identity. And that's particularly important in the first year. So I've been doing some of that with you. The other thing the interim does is surfaces conflicts, unresolved conflicts from the past. And I have to say that one of the unresolved conflicts that has popped up over and over again is from the ministry of Roy Phillips, and particularly around his departure. But his behavior, particularly towards the end of his ministry, has caused, is a continuing source of concern and pain for some, and confusion about why he left in the first place on others. So unresolved conflicts in the past. I'm sure there are others, but that was one that surfaced. The interim works individually and institutionally, which means I do a lot of one-on-one meetings, but I'm also concerned with the whole, with the institution and the institutional health and well-being. Pastoral care during times of interim is absolutely critical, and that's why I'm so grateful to have such an experienced colleague in Reverend Karen Gustafson, who's not only pastoral care, but has interim minister or interim training and knowledge, so a partner in this ministry. The other thing the interim time does is to listen carefully and look for patterns. And to see where are the dots, how to connect the dots of these patterns that emerge, and then reflect that back to you, the congregation, and say, here's what I'm seeing. Is this what you're seeing? And in fact, this gathering is one of those times to reflect back to you what I'm hearing and seeing. And creating a plan for a path forward. But of course, plans are only as good as people are willing to engage with them. So the congregation gets to make a conscious choice. Sometimes congregations just want an interim to be a placeholder. That's not preferred by most of us because this is a very generative and important time. But you get to make that choice about how you want to use your interim minister and ministry time. So, let's see. So this is where I want to invite Reverend Karen to come up and talk a little bit about pastoral care during the interim time. Whoops, go back. Yes. Which one? No. Okay. Everybody's a technology expert. Yeah. Right. But the lag is the Zoom, right? Because we are on Zoom. So, yeah, thanks. Be patient and let's breathe together during those lag times. Thank you.
Well, it's probably an understatement to say that times of congregational transition are at best times that present a complex set of personal and institutional pastoral care needs. Yes. Whoa. Well, that's my goal, is to love it at home. Um, so I can repeat that because it goes, it's an important thing, that times of congregational transition are at best present a complex set of personal and institutional pastoral needs and concerns. Some obvious and recognizable, others are buried in the relational. There are pastoral needs that are buried in the layers of history, some of which Kathleen has mentioned, and these are historical and relational, what I call dis-ease. Transition is the place. Transition is a place where we tap into the unprocessed grief and expectations, both institutional and personal. We have a history here, you have a history here of exemplary pastoral care that has addressed individuals and systems available to both members and congregations through the congregation, through pastoral care teams, through other kinds of organizational and systemic efforts to create a real shared ministry in which you are both the receivers and offerers of pastoral care to one another. But there's a bit of an overload, and there's always the issue around um, when those needing care also need care. And I think that is one of the unique dynamics that is occurring during this particular transition time. And so I just, obviously this system is stressed by an avalanche of losses. The pandemic, the shift in leadership, illnesses and deaths, and all of those transitions and stressors that Kathleen mentioned earlier. And so what the unique role of the interim minister of pastoral care are that, first of all, that is the first part is not unique, and that is that you absolutely need your immediate pastoral needs met, as in all of the things that all of the things that have always been here, the rites of passage, the deaths um, and uh, the births and deaths and all the things, um, you need to have those needs met. And I certainly am here to meet those needs and also to arrange for other kinds of resources that will help support you during those times. But in addition, um, this is an opportunity to look at what kinds of pastoral care structures does this congregation need in times of stress? And how do we build resilience into the system through education and through opportunities to really talk about how are the current structures working? And some of them are working darn well. I want to say I've really been impressed with that. Um, and we need to look at the resources that are available within the congregation and find ways to leverage that, to look at the strengths that this congregation has and what the challenges are to those strengths so that we can find ways to build in a deeper level of support. And, and part of that is is around succession management in terms of your care structures. You have some people who have been really working well for a long time who are in danger of burning out. So how do we shore those systems up? So those are some of the things that are happening within that time, and also providing educational resources. The grief program, the expectations program, the looking at transition will all come out of the pastoral care approach during interim.
Thanks, Karen. That's a good segue to the next slide, which is what we're doing already. Just to give you a recap or a reminder of some of the things that have already happened. I'm weaving themes, whoops, sorry about that. Weaving themes into sermons and services. Let me go back. Okay, I'm a little trigger happy here. Sorry. Just press it once, leave it alone, right? It's like pressing the elevator button over and over and over again, right? So I'm weaving themes into sermons and services about your history, about your identity. Sometimes I'm very direct, and sometimes I'm not direct. I'm sort of like, for those who have ears to hear, let them hear. We are already having groups and gatherings on grief and trauma. Karen's group starts on Tuesday, I think, a 4-part series. We have had a Wellspring Wednesday program on the interim time and on grief, and we will continue to use Wellspring Wednesday for opportunities. And eventually, this is not what we're doing already, but we are already thinking about creating rituals of healing, release, and so forth, but we're not quite there yet. Although I think we are planning for a, what are we calling it? It's not a Blue Christmas service, but a service, particularly around the holidays, to acknowledge some of the grief and losses that people feel around the holidays. There are 2 things I wanted to tell you about that are in the queue already, and one is called the Congregational Life Review. If some of you may remember that this was the weekend that was supposed to happen. The Congregational Life Review is just a quick recap about that. It's a the intersection and relationship between those 3. So, for example, this picture, which you can't see, but it is the results of a congregational life review for a church in Birmingham, Alabama. Not a UU church, it was a Presbyterian church. And in their congregational timeline, they discovered that in the events in the life of the world, like Brown versus Board of Education, race. So you begin to see and patterns and habits in congregations. So what happens after that? After the congregational life review, when we gather, we tell stories, we put up post-it notes, all that data is collected, reviewed, and later shared with the congregation, either in a workshop or maybe in a service. I'm tentatively scheduling that for February 3rd and 4th. And again, it depends on where we are and if we think we're ready. I just felt like to do that kind of deep, intense sharing of stories before doing some of the this other work and having these conversations was premature. We are also planning on a presentation from Team Dynamics called Courage, Change, Conflict, and Complexity Workshop. That was scheduled for this fall, and wisely we decided that we needed to move that. It's now scheduled for January 28th, and that will be offered by Team Dynamics. And again, I think it's a really great opportunity to explore not only our ongoing commitment to anti-racist practices and expanding our intercultural capacities, learning about self and others while engaging in practices of change, conflict, and complexity. I think it's going to be enormously helpful. So that is something that I strongly encourage you all to attend. Okay, so this is now, the next slide is what we could do. And I'm going to give you an overview of this first, and then I'm going to go into the specifics. And this is a result of my best thinking based on our conversations over these last 90 days of what might be helpful for unity. Of course, only you can really decide. So the first thing is to have one-on-one, to provide one-on-one, or to have one-on-one conversations between estranged members with a trained facilitator and pastoral support. Because I'm aware that there are members here who have become estranged from other church members, sometimes relationships that have gone back, 20, 30, 40 years, because of the vote and because they voted differently. So the first place we can start is with one-on-one conversations. For those who are willing to do that. And this would be a trained facilitator in conflict transformation and someone who is not a member of Unity Church, obviously. I'd also like to extend that offer to groups. So the next one would be small group conversations with a trained facilitator and pastoral support. The third is a series of possibilities for the congregation. Congregational study engagement in the following areas. They could be explore congregational covenant. Again, I'm going to talk more about these in a minute. Explore what other churches do with called a right relations team. And read Transforming Conflict and participate in a workshop offered by Reverend Dr. Teresa Cooley. So let me go into a little more detail on these. The first one I actually, I know. I'm glad somebody's laughing about this little. Let's talk about not talking. One-on-one conversations between estranged members with trained facilitator, pastoral presence. I said this, facilitator outside Unity Church, trained in conflict transformation. One piece of critique I heard, particularly about the listening sessions, was that it was one individual felt like it needed more trained facilitation. And I think it was also in part those conversations happened right shortly after the vote. And so, anyway, and the purpose is to restore relationship. I've made some initial inquiries about who's out there. I mean, there's a wealth of resources in the Twin Cities area, and I've been referred to a person at University of Minnesota. There's a place called Vital Edge Consulting, but you all are the experts. If you have knowledge or wisdom about a person or a company that would be good at facilitation, please do let me know. Same thing with small groups. I would love to see groups of maybe 6 people get together with a shared meal, break bread together, again with a facilitator and pastoral support if you would like. And the purpose is to restore relationships. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a one and done. I mean, this may take a series of these conversations, but it's a place to start. And so I'd love to hear eventually what your thoughts are, or if you would be interested in that personally. Not just, it's good for somebody else to do. This is personally, I would welcome this. Now I want to talk about what I've learned from other congregations that I've served. Almost all of them have created a congregational covenant. And it goes by different names. It can be called the Covenant of Right Relations, Covenant of Healthy Congregations, Behavioral Covenant. And what that is it identifies behaviors that support healthy congregational life. You have a lot of good information here. You have outstanding end statements. You have visionary and compelling statements. But what I haven't found is a behavioral covenant or a congregational covenant that says this is how we agree to be in relationship with one another. I've seen this covenant used liturgically on an annual basis where it's part of the worship service. I've also seen it used in new member orientations, which help members, new members, understand this is how we agree to be together. And then it also provides guidance for when the covenant is broken. Now, I want to acknowledge this is generally, this is not disruptive behavior. This is not misconduct. This is when you have when you have either a problem with another congregant or you need to be held accountable for your behavior and your speech. This is an excerpt from All Souls Church, D.C., Covenant of Right Relations. All Souls in Washington, D.C., as some of you may know, I just served there as their interim for the last 2 years. They underwent a very public and humiliating and painful conflict, the reverberations of which are still being addressed. In fact, they hired a transformative justice team to work with them at the instigation of the Right Relations Committee, which I'll talk about in a minute. Oh, wait a minute. You haven't seen that yet. Sorry, it's coming. Yeah. So this is from All Souls, and it's an excerpt. It's really long, but I think it's quite beautiful. I mean, it talks about working with conflict. We resolve conflicts directly using openness and compassion. We acknowledge our mistakes and shortcomings and are willing to forgive those of others. We support each other in times of joy and need. And so this is part of their covenant of right relations that helps guide them as they go forward and work through some of the ramifications of this conflict. And so alongside the covenant of right relations, some congregations create something called a healthy congregations team or a right relations team. And I want to say a few words about that. Again, I'm not advocating or pushing that you need to do this tomorrow. This is for your education to think about, to learn about what other congregations have done and why. So the Right Relations team or Healthy Congregations team tends to the covenant. That is their purpose. And they do this by articulating and modeling its practice, I've seen Healthy Congregations team, for example, um, do a worship service or trainings. So it's a reminder about how do we practice this covenant in relationship with one another. They provide training around healthy ways to engage with differences. They model and coach creative conflict. Not always, but often it's appointed by and accountable to the board. And that does depend solely on your organizational structure. And so every congregation does this a little differently. But there is clarity about accountability and also boundaries. I want to stress that the Healthy Congregations team is not the morality police. I mean, that's sort of like the first fear, like, ooh, if I say something, that hurts somebody, they're going to ban me from church. That's not what this is about. But there is clarity about to whom are they accountable. Members generally have conflict transformation skills and experience. And if you go Google conflict or Healthy Congregations team or Right Relations UUA, you will find pages about offerings, trainings. They most recently did a training for churches in the DC area, Pacific Northwest. Regional lead David Pyle is interested in bringing some kind of training here because First Universalist and White Bear are also interested in what does a right relations team look like? What do they do? So that's something that is in conversation right now. The next thing is to engage with conflict transformation. And I love this quote from Teresa Cooley. I just attended a 4-hour workshop yesterday as part of my interim ministry training. And from the book, she wrote, "We are not in conflict because we are bad or because we've done something wrong. We are in conflict because we have something to learn." And in a sense, that is what we are doing here. We are trying to learn about what happened and how do we, what's important to learn about what happened and what will not ever be answered. So one idea is to have an all-congregational read and workshop on this book, Transforming Conflict, The Blessings of Congregational Turmoil. It's intended to be offered by or used by small groups in congregational settings. There's questions at the end of each chapter. Could be a congregational all-church read, small group conversations in person and online about key points of the book, and a sermon service about dealing with conflict. And, oh, sorry, thank you. And looking at sermon services dealing about conflict and the spiritual practice of learning how to deal with the complexities of conflict, and inviting Reverend Cooley for a workshop and a Sunday service. She is currently serving as the interim minister of the church in Pasadena, California. Inspiration for the infamous book, Search, which if you have not read it, I would recommend that you don't read it. It's, yeah, you can tell me, I can tell you why later, but yeah. So what are the next steps? The next steps are feedback form via survey, which will be either sent to the entire congregation and or on the sheets of paper that are in the back of the room, which we will encourage you to take. They're two-sided. One side is just asking for your thoughts about what you just heard. Does any of this speak to you of this session? After a break, we're going to take a break in just a minute. After the break, the board is going to offer their reflections, and then we will develop a plan for moving forward. Early January 2023, the board and the executive team will be on retreat in January. We're going to compile this information, and and share with you the plan, our best thinking about what we think needs to happen next. So that's, I just said that before the break. Consider the options you just heard. Which ones would you personally attend? I didn't include the team dynamics training or the congregational life review because those are time for a break. 15 minutes. We're going to take a 15-minute break, which means we're going to return at 10:30. 10:30, folks. Coffee, water, delicious snacks. Whoops. water, grab some of those beautiful snacks. I want to give a shout out to staff today, to Heidi, who is monitoring this. Woo-hoo! To Teresa, who helped with the snacks. Woohoo! And our coffee makers, Tom, and I didn't catch the other name. Bonnie, thank you for making coffee. So make your way to your seats for part two. Not round two. But I think there's some work that needs to be done before we get there. Yeah, and we're not there. For T-anated, that doesn't work at all. Let me just ask first, what are the feelings in the room right now? Feel the feels, that's right. And Rilke said, no feeling is final. So carry that with us. So I'm going to just invite us to breathe again. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. Our board president.
Whenever I am up in front of the congregation in any meeting that I've been in, I look out among the faces and I'm reminded of all the stories that I have with so many people sitting here and people on Zoom. And I find that I have deep gratitude for all those connections. And I remind myself standing up here that I am embraced and loved in my imperfections. helps me be grounded. So before I get into this, I want to say that I'm going to talk about what came from a variety of sources that the board has gathered and discussed and reflected on over the months since the May meeting that came in at different times over the entire summer. The 5 sources that hopefully you saw in the board email, but I'm going to raise them up because some people may not have seen it, is a report from the ministerial search team to the board by members who chose to participate in the report. Former interim minister Reverend Kathy Hertz, 1-page outline of the elements that contributed to, as she says, the perfect storm. A summary reflection of board and executive team meeting with the regional lead, Reverend David Pyle, noting that there was no formal report. What was shared with you is a summation of a variety of people's notes in memory of that meeting very soon thereafter. We also have themes that emerge from the circle congregations, the circle conversations that was provided by Reverend K.P. Hung, our Minister of Faith Formation, and then many emails and from congregants to the board that have been shared with the entire board, and conversations that the board members have had with a wide variety of people at Unity. Those were not shared, those were confidential communications, but know that all of that has been, that's part of the sources that lead to what I'm going to share with you today. So we get the question of what happened. On this question, I want to start by saying that what the board felt was important was to make sure that we had a full picture of things before conclusions were made, and this simply took time. You include in there the transition of interim minister and wanting wise counsel of an interim minister experienced with congregational conflict and trauma. All of this needed time. What we were very intentional about doing was not on assessing blame. Everyone involved worked from a place of deep love for this church. Decisions by the previous boards, plural, our former ministers, the members of the MST, Reverend Kathy Hurt, the current board, Reverend Jen Crow, who was our ministerial settlement representative, and every member who spoke at the congregational meeting. People in the transitions office at the UUA. Everyone worked from a place of love. We cannot forget that. Even words spoken at the May meeting that we might have disagreed about were spoken from a place of love. So blame does nothing productive. There were many factors at play that led to the outcome, including the pandemic and the impact it has had on the congregational life that we have and our connections. The impact it has had on the pool of candidates available for being in search. That was very much, I'd say, an eye-opener in our conversation that the board and executive team had with Reverend David Pyle from the Mid-America District. The tragic and sad news relating to Reverend Rob and Jan Eller Isaacs, our beloved former ministers' illnesses and then death. The departure of Karen Herring. The fact of a 1-year interim period. The strained relationships that Unity has with the UUA. The social, the political, and the economic climate that has been unfolding since the start of the pandemic. This is not a short list. These are the things that go into creating that perfect storm. I do believe that any one of these things isolated in and of them by themselves would not have had much effect. But you take them in a collective, it was a perfect storm. Does that mean we were doomed to that destiny? I don't know. I don't think that that's a question that we actually need to answer, but I think it's part of the context that we need to understand that we've been in. It's not an excuse. It's part of a context that we have been in. So, what happened? I think this quote is really powerful. And this comes from the book. Reverend Teresa Cooley quotes it from this author in her book. Deep conflicts are stressful and painful. At worst, they are violent and destructive. Yet at the same time, they create some of the most intense spiritual encounters we experience. Conflict opens a path, a holy path, toward revelation and reconciliation. We can choose to look at all of this as an opportunity to grow deeper, to learn about ourselves, and find a better path forward for ourselves. So the reality is there is no one single story of what happened. I've talked to so many people, I've received so many emails. There are so many different perspectives of what happened. We've touched on it in sermons. There's just no one single narrative. We know that Unity has weathered conflict in the past. We will weather this. We are a strong and healthy congregation, despite the conflict. Just because we have conflict does not mean we are not healthy. It's what do we do with it? How do we move forward? What do we take from this? How do we learn to move forward? That's a healthy congregation. And I think noting that there were multiple system failures at play. And I personally make a choice to not look at the search as a failure. It's not a failure. It's an unfortunate outcome. But we are where we are. And so what do we do with it to move forward? So that is really what has shaped how the board has approached this. And we felt that it was important to let the sources come in, let the congregation kind of rest from the turmoil, and not meter out the pieces of information, because you can make conclusions on one piece that aren't necessarily helpful. It's the broader picture that is really important for us to look at. So that's why it took some time to release everything. And the board took its deliberate time to digest and talk about and think about what we need to move forward. So what did we learn? I'm going to share those things with you. But there are many other things that we're not going to share today that I want you to know we heard, we have gathered, but our task is to identify what are the things that rise to the top, that are our action items to move forward. We can't spread ourselves so thin that nothing gets accomplished. So it's what really do we need to focus on? Sure. So here are the insights we gained from reviewing all of the materials that we gathered, the overarching realizations. There was a lack of clarity about who had the ultimate accountability for the search process. Was it the board or the search team? The board asked this question. We got conflicting answers. We did the best with what we could at the time, and we realized that we have some action items that come from this issue. A lack of clarity about various denominational roles associated with the search. And this is an example, a list of the examples that we have identified. What's the regional lead's role in the search? What's the role of the transitions coach, which is apparently now being phased out? What's the role of the interim minister in the process? I don't know if we really had full clarity on that. And with it being 1 year, could everything be accomplished that we needed to accomplish? What is truly confidential about the search and what can be shared more widely and publicly? I think this is something that led to a lot of problems that we ended up having. Is the MST felt very isolated, and there have been calls for transparency, and it wasn't clear of what could be shared and clearly what couldn't. So we have work to do in understanding and educating about that. Is there a final authority when the board search team are receiving different or conflicting information and or advice? How do we reconcile that? I realize that due to the pandemic and the disjointedness of church life, not being together in person to do much of our work until this year was also a challenge for us. The pandemic and managing how to oversee all aspects of our lives, church life, and all that was going into that 2020 in hindsight. This is an opportunity for us to gain that 2020 hindsight. So what can we do to address these insights? The next several slides are breaking down the work that lies ahead into the following categories: systems processes, communication and education, MST formation and work, and then some key questions that lie ahead. Yep. So processes the board has identified for us to work on. Equal access to voting members in the congregational meeting. We have received a lot of feedback of what did not feel right about that voting process. And so we are going to be looking at our bylaws on that and revising them. Reviewing the 75% vote threshold in our bylaws for calling a minister. What was interesting in our conversation with David Pyle, and we'd heard this, we knew this, ministers in their UUMA covenant are, they're in agreement that they don't accept congregational calls under 90%. So why do we have 75%? That resulted in a gap of understanding for us and a sense of, well, a majority voted to call her, why isn't she here? What I do know, and I think this is an important thing to clarify, is that the people that did end up leaving the congregational meeting and not casting a vote, if we even presumed that they would have voted a yes, it still would not have made the threshold of 75%. I think that's important for us to understand. So I think we have some work to do in understanding that disconnect. David Pyle mentioned that a lot of congregations have something around 75%. That's not uncommon. And those were put in place well before the UUMA started adopting more of a belief in 90%. So how do there needs reconciliation there. Review and reconsider the all congregational meeting mechanics. How do we have good meetings together? What are the behaviors that we expect of each other in meetings? We've had conversations as a board about Robert's Rules of Order. Are those the best things for us to use? But how do we maintain systems of order within a meeting? Those are things we're grappling with. Determine who has the authority to pause or halt the search process. Determine how the decision will be made. And is this a policy or a bylaw issue? There is nothing out there to guide us on answering this with clarity. And my hope is that we're never in this situation again. But it would behoove us to address that gap. Here we are. So this is about communication and education. The board has realized that there were many things that were not clear to people, and perhaps we didn't even realize were not clear until afterwards. We identified a number of areas in which the congregation needs better communication and education about various aspects of the search. So in retrospect as well, 1-year interim was simply not enough for us. I've thought about this question, and when the decision was made about doing a 1-year interim, I thought, that makes perfect sense. I get it. Rob and Jan gave us a huge lead time of notice. This wasn't I'm moving to a new congregation in April. I'm telling the congregation and I'm gone in August. That was not our situation. So we had time to prepare and be ready for the fact that Rob and Jan, 20-year tenure, were going to be leaving. We could start our grieving process. That's only a small part of the work of interim. What I have come to realize is there's a whole part of interim that we didn't give ourselves time to tend to. And this isn't about blame at all. The best decision was made at the time. But in retrospect, I believe that because of where we are today, we needed more time. And there's a question we'll talk about later that's related to that. For a 21-year tenure of ministers, in our conversation with David Pyle, he says congregations need more time. We're a large congregation, so it simply takes more time to reach more congregants to participate in the process of gathering the information, pulling people into the process. And I do believe that kind of email fatigue, online fatigue, has been a factor for people. Reverend Kathy did not have the time she needed to do the work that an interim minister needs to do. And, in working with Kathleen, that has become clear that she didn't have the time to do the work. We were already in the search process when she started. So determine and implement a communication plan to ensure frequent, easily accessible, and clear sharing of information with the congregation about the search process. This statement does not mean that the MST did not have good communication. They kept us informed of every step of the process. I do not want that to be lost. But people talk about lack of transparency or they didn't know. So I want to say some of that onus is on us. Were we paying enough attention to the different communications that came out? Ask yourself. Education about issues of transparency and confidentiality in the search process. We're going to talk about that. Were the ideas of confidentiality more restrictive than they needed to be? Possibly. David Pyle shared with us that outside of the kind of list of who is applying, the candidates, there isn't a whole lot of confidentiality. They deserve that confidentiality that they're searching for a job because some of their congregations have no idea. So we need to clarify that. Education about being in search as a member congregation of the UUA. Unity is so used to being on our hill. What do we need the UUA for? Well, again, David Pyle indicated that a lot of large congregations don't think they need the UUA until they're in trouble. But the reality is that we are a congregation in covenant with other UUA congregations being part of the UUA. So we have to play by fair rules in order to be part of the UUA in search. So we'll be working on that too. Clarity and education about the purpose of candidating week. I can't really answer this yet. I don't have a lot to say about it except that I think we need clarity on that. I don't think we were all on the same page about what the purpose was of candidating week. Discuss tension inherent in the idea of trusting the MST and congregational discernment, and how participation in cottage meetings and congregational input can lend to that tension. I would say lend to decreasing that tension. Did we have enough people participating? Was that part of what led to the disconnect that happened during candidating week and when it came to the vote? Possibly. And then consider how to better engage the congregation in the search process. A lot of these things are items that the board is going to work on, but they require congregational participation. The next one is MST formation and work in general for the MST. What we have identified is Unity's relationship with the UUA. What does it mean to be in covenant with the UUA at regional and national levels? We don't have the best relationship with these bodies. And the board has realized there's a lot that we didn't know because of the breakdown of that relationship. We have to work on rebuilding that relationship. There are so many resources available through the regional and the national parts of our faith denomination that would have been really helpful for us had we known. But there was historically a disconnect between the leadership of the congregation and the resources available. It was managed by our ministers. Reconsidering the MST makeup and team size. David Pyle, once again, you're going to hear his name quite often. There's a lot of information in that report that we shared with you. But 9 members is actually a very large MST. And he said for the size of our congregation, 7 would have been more of a magic number. And that has to do with how do you get the number of people to reach consensus? So 5 to 7 is a much more common size for an MST in congregations. Wish we had known that. Ensure there is clarity, a clearly established line of communication between the board and the MST, and that the MST understands its charge. I'm not saying the MST didn't understand its charge. I'm saying we might not have been as clear as we could have been. And we thought we had to operate as 2 silos. What we've learned is there absolutely can and there should be communication during the search process between the MST and the board. So we're going to work on developing that. And then making sure that the MST has access to pastoral care throughout their process so that their internal needs as a group and as individuals are being tended to. There was too much of a sense of isolation there. So I talked about some key questions that I kind of gave you a little hint that we were going to touch on. I think these are some critical questions that the board is facing right now. Do we know who we are as a congregation, and what are the pros and cons of postponing the ends renewal process, which is actually scheduled if we're on our 5-year plan for 2023? Do we do that? How does that impact or intersect with a search if we are doing that on the timeline that we have been thinking about doing that? How do these interplay? Would that be helpful to complete before doing a search? This is something we're going to be talking about. And to determine whether our church would be best served by a 2 or 3 year interim period. When I say that, I'm talking about starting from this year with Kathleen going forward. So actually, in reality, we had a year of interim, so it's 3 or 4. But I think that that's a really important question for us to grapple with. And I continue to learn that more and more larger congregations take longer than 2 years. And that's not a bad thing. It's not outside of our congregation with the pandemic and what's going on in our larger society. Do we need time to really come back together after a pandemic and get grounded and realize who we are? Don't tell me we haven't changed. I've changed because of the pandemic. It's changed all of us. So how does that impact us as a congregation? These are really important questions for us to think about. Board colleague who has had a number of conversations with people, and when asked the question, I'm not asking people to necessarily give me an answer, but I'm sharing this anecdote. No, we need to get a new minister in place. And then when you ask the question, well, that actually means that come this February, we're going to be starting the process of putting a new MST together. Do you think we're ready? Do you think the answer's been consistent? So this is why this is an important question. I'm sharing this not saying we have an answer to it, but I think that this is an important question for us to grapple with and make a decision on. So you've heard about work that the interim ministers and the ET are working on in the first part of the presentation. And there are things that we've talked about that fall under the board's work. But there's also a lot of work embedded in there for you. For us as a congregation, the members of this congregation. And I would say that there's work there for the UUA as well and its entities. None of this work will be performed in a silo by any of these entities. This is our work to do together. And we cannot pass off the task to, quote, others and assume that that will be enough. We all have a role in this. It's everyone's responsibility to be a part of learning from our past and shaping our future. I'm so glad that you're here in person and online. I'm glad it's recorded. I hope that people will listen to this and learn from it and take it in. We need to be patient with one another. We need to be curious with one another. We need to trust one another. I ask that you trust the board in the work that we're doing. We need to engage with one another, and we need to continue to be in love with each other, a loving relationship, and support each other. We're in this together. We can do this. So there are cards at the end of the various aisles where you're sitting. They're large, what do you call index cards and pens. And we want you to take a moment in person, writing it on the card. If you're on Zoom, we would like you to post this into the chat. And as Kathleen mentioned, the purpose is to capture everybody's questions or thoughts so nothing gets lost. We will be capturing this on the Zoom, saving it so we know. But do you feel that we have heard you? And if not, what have we missed? Or do you have a burning question? Please put it on the card. So I'm going to give people about 5 minutes to work on that task. We will have board members go around and gather the cards. When your card is ready, you can pick that up. Just hold it up, and Debbie and Clover are going to pick those up from you. So thank you, everybody, for providing your thoughts on the cards. I'm just kind of perusing through them, and they are so thoughtful. And they raise good questions that, we're going to be spending time with these, and we're not going to like stand and give you answers to each of your questions right here. But know that these are heard and will be interwoven into the work of interim ministry, the executive team, and the board. So I appreciate them very, very much. We also are asking you to fill out a survey. There are two sides to it. They're being handed out and they're at the back table. We would like you to do this before you leave today. They're also going to be provided for access online.
Until probably Tuesday of next week.
Yeah, Tuesday of next week, to get reflections on what kind of resonates with you from what Kathleen shared, and then feedback to the board about today. If you can do that today, that would be great if you're here in person, but otherwise look for the email. And I'm so grateful that you're all here. We do have, I'm gonna let Kathleen talk, and then we will do a closing.
Well, I too want to thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for those of you online, watching online as well. As I said earlier, your responses are going to help us develop the plan for moving forward. So just to get a sense, a feel of what would be helpful for this congregation is deeply appreciated. And so I'm grateful. I just wanted to draw to your attention two books. One that I did already mention. This is the one that Teresa Coley just published on transforming conflict. And this is something that, because it came out during COVID and many congregations were shut down, didn't get a lot of attention, but it's a report of the UUA Commission on Appraisal, and it's called Unlocking the Power of Covenant. And it's about, as you might guess, covenant and how we live into our covenantal relationships as Unitarian Universalists. So for future study or reflection. So it's 11:15. Can we just get like a shout out? Like, woohoo! We thought 12:30. Y'all going to be able to go leave a little bit earlier, but just want to close with a reflection first. At the very beginning of this, I talked about what I've heard and what I've seen and what I've felt, and it was that long list of things related to the particularly the congregational search process, or the search process and the vote. But what I didn't say was one of the most important things I have also heard and seen and felt is It's not a mushy, gushy, hallmarky kind of love. It is a deep and abiding love for this institution, for the history of this church, for ancestors, for legacy, for the people who are here now, for the children and the families, and also love for the future of this church. So when Louise was talking about the fact that everyone acted out of love, I have sensed and heard and felt that from so many of you. So our closing words is really another song. And I invite you, if you're willing and able, to rise in body or spirit. And this is a song that you probably know, but I'm changing the word a little bit because that's what we can do as Unitarian Universalists. Sometimes we can change the words. It goes like this. I keep on till I find it. There is more love right here. One more time. There is more love right here. There is more love right here. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love right here. Amen. There is indeed more love right here. Go forth from this time and this place, feeling that love within you and sharing it with others. Thank you again for being here. Blessed be. May it be so.